Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Uncensored CMO. Now, in this special series, we are partnering with our very good friends at NBCUniversal to do a special series focusing on CMOs that have used the game-changing power of sport to transform their brand. This episode, we're going to be joined by Tyler Bahl, the CMO of Activision. Now, if you don't know, Activision are one of the world's biggest game developers. They produce games like Call of Duty and my personal favourite, Tony Hawk Pro Skater. This is an amazing episode, and Tyler's bringing a lot of insight into how they've used the power of sport to transform their business. Here it is. Tyler from Activision, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, can't wait to get into gaming because it's a fascinating industry, really big industry, and a lot going on. But maybe before we do that, tell me a little bit about your journey here. But I'm particularly interested to know what happened at Quibi as well, because you had quite a wild ride, didn't you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm kind of a 14-year-old boy living my passions, and I worked in sneakers at Reebok. I worked in music at Columbia Records. I worked at Google and tech, and then I had an opportunity to go into streaming for Quibi, working with Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman. And so it was an amazing opportunity. It lasted about 9 months. We launched right on top of the pandemic, and we were launching 10-minute episodes, or 10-minute quality episodes. And you had about 9 hours of Tiger King, in the month of April, right after COVID. And so the idea didn't fully land, but I still believe in it, and I think it had a lot of potential. And then after that folded, I moved over to Activision and got to work on my favorite video game with Call of Duty.
So you are living proof that you can follow your passion, not just your talent, and still be successful.
I mean, you have to stay humble and hustle, but yeah, you could totally follow your passions, and you just have to have that grit and determination to go after it.
Now, I was thinking about gaming because I was a big gamer as a kid, and I'm probably, well, I don't know, I should ask you actually whether I'm stereotypical of most people, but I probably gamed until I was maybe 16, 17, then life took over and, had to get a job and all that kind of thing. But I was up in the attic digging out the games I used to play, and back in the day, literally using cassettes, loading Outrun, you had to wait for 5 minutes while the cassette loaded the game into the computer. I imagine a little bit has changed in the few years since I used to play. But tell me about the kind of gaming industry. How big is it? Like, what's hot in the industry?
Yeah, I think there were a couple of systems in the 70s, but I think in the 80s it really took off, with Pac-Man in 1980, and then thinking about the NES system, which really kind of was the catalyst for kind of what we think about gaming today. And then you go into, I remember in my childhood, it was like the Wizard movie with Fred Savage, right? And there was these video game competitions, and it's evolved, and in every decade since then, everyone's grown up with gaming and stuff. And so you think about the addition of 3D graphics, you think about online communities and connectivity, and then you think about, moving on to COVID, where it just was this, kind of threw gas on the fire in order to kind of expand from there. And so, gaming is really the center of culture at this point in time. I mean, it's a $200 billion industry. It's bigger than books or movies or music, and so it's really taken over, but I think really it's become part of people's identity, right? And it's part of their lifestyle now. And I'll ask you, are you a gamer?
Well, I'd probably say no, but you'll probably tell me I am, really.
Yeah, I mean, think about all the ways people play right now with, on mobile devices, thinking about, Candy Crush, from our sister company King, or thinking about, the New York Times being a gaming company now where you're playing, the crossword puzzle or you're playing Wordle. Yeah. And so there's so many different ways to play. Even LinkedIn has gaming now. And so I think the definition of a gamer has evolved. And I ask people that all the time, and they're like, I'm not a gamer. And then I look at their phone and they have all of these
Actually,
games.
That's a good point. I did check this out, that there is one game in your portfolio that I play probably every day. My sort of guilty little secret. Can you guess what that is?
Well, I'm a fan of the podcast, and I know that you're a skater. So my assumption is that you are a Tony Hawk fan.
Well, I'm a massive, massive Tony Hawk fan. If I had the time, I would be all in on Pro Skater. I mean, he's my guy, right? I'm a kid from the 80s. I followed Tony Hawk growing up.
Well, I brought you, I don't want you to carry anything too heavy back from the can, but I brought you this mini skateboard from the Tony Hawk games.
Unbelievable.
And we're really excited. We're bringing Tony Hawk back this year. So on July 10th, we're going to remaster 3 and 4 Pro Skaters. So all the original parks, all the original skaters, but it also brings up this idea of nostalgia, right? Yeah. So it's all the things that you loved, as a kid. The game came out almost 23 years ago. But now, we're freshening it up in different ways, obviously bringing HD graphics and bringing it to new platforms like Switch 2. But in addition to that, we're bringing SpongeBob SquarePants to the game. And so he is going to have a skate park there. We have Michelangelo from the Ninja Turtles, right? So we're doing things to freshen it up. And we're even doing collaborations with like Doom and bringing that franchise over. So it's this kind of catalyst of, what's old is new again, but also bringing a fresh take to it.
I wonder with Tony Hawk, I was a really big fan of Bane's Brigade and Tony kind of growing up. Did the game I presume the game itself also made him much more famous than he probably was, because he was probably a kind of skate cult icon, but what do you think the role of the game had in popularizing him?
Yeah, I mean, for all the people that didn't skate, it was the only way that I, had a connection to skate culture. And so playing this game, obviously, the music, right? The parks themselves, and then all the skaters, right? Like I knew all the skaters from the game itself. So I think it really did a lot to really expand skate culture and really, obviously the catalyst of him having, 5 or 6 games and then now us all remastering them, and he's still as relevant today as he was back then from a skate perspective. So I think it was really, it was a partnership, and I think it's also helped, grow his, profile.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. So what's the profile of someone who will play kind of Tony Hawk Pro Skater? So is it people like me that were kind of OG fans of him growing up, or is he brought a new generation of skate fans in through the game?
It's both, right? I mean, you think about it, it's like, I played as a kid and I want to play again, and then it's also introducing the game to my kids, for the first time and being able to play. And so I think that's the fun of it, is that you're able to kind of connect to different generations. Like, my parents didn't really understand gaming, right? And as a concept, or, I think my mom, did buy the Atari, 2600, and we had one in our house. But I think at the same time, now every single generation since the 80s has grown up with gaming. It's just part of their household, and the consoles or devices are already there. And now with mobile, it's just, everyone has access to it. And so that's enabled just about anybody, to play a game like Tony.
And I think what people also forget is, like, as a parent, of course, your kids then get into gaming. So I started off with a ZX Spectrum 81 with like 4K of RAM, with literally Pac-Man in black and white sort of thing, or green screen. And then, of course, my kids will be on, an ultra-modern kind of console. And it's just amazing to see how it's kind of moved on in that time.
Yeah, and it was consoles for a while. And then I think the PC, audience has just continued to grow. And so, I mean, to be able to really trick out and customize, your system and continue to update it. And it also has its own kind of subculture within gaming, right? Of being a PC player versus a console player. And so, and then you see some new devices that, that are coming out, like Xbox just announced, their new kind of ROG Ally X. And I think being able to carry a PC in your luggage, right, and have all those high-end, high-fidelity games, I think is, kind of unlocking additional opportunity.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to ask you about how you launch a game, because I think Pro Skater is coming out, isn't it, in a couple of weeks' time? Mm-hmm. So we're kind of just on the edge of the launch. I had a little bit of an experience with gaming. So I launched Mountain Dew in the UK, and we did a collaboration with one of your competitors, actually, Halo 4, and we had Master Chief on the on pack on the bottle, and we called it Game Fuel. We turned it red rather than green. And I've never seen a reaction like it. It was just mind-blowing. So bear in mind, this is an energy drink that you'd pay £2 or $3 for, right? And people were queuing up at midnight. I mean, we literally launched it at midnight, like in line with the game. And we had all these kind of people on social media photographing and filming huge queues and sort of celebrating the fact they'd bought an entire case of Mountain Dew. And I think we sold about 4 months stock in the first week. But I've never seen, like, as a cultural moment, I've never seen anything quite as... It's probably similar to when the iPhone back in the day used to do a launch and people would go crazy over that. But is that how it is? Is game launches like that still?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's even bigger. I mean, we don't see as much people lining up at GameStop anymore because, a majority of the purchases are happening digitally. But I think the fandom is still there, right? And I think the energy and excitement, I mean, we see the same things for our partners, whether it's Monster or Little Caesars, and brands like Polaris that we work with, that the fans get really excited because it's part of their identity now, right? It's becoming, I like to think of a Call of Duty as a lifestyle brand, right? Like, it's not just having your hands on the sticks. You got to think about it like there's actually more people watching video games now than playing video games, right? And that was something that was very foreign to me. When I was a kid, I just wanted to have my hands on the sticks. My brother was playing and I was just really annoyed and waiting for him to get off. And I think now people actually enjoy watching games, right? And so it's part of their lifestyle. And you might not be a Call of Duty player, but you might be aware of Call of Duty. You might be a mom buying the game for your relative and stuff. And so thinking about, okay, that overall cultural audience, and now with this transmedia, gaming, it used to be you would buy the book rights, right? And then you turn it into the movie or the TV series, and then you'd expand to amusement parks. And now it's starting with gaming, right? And you see the success of Fallout, and you see the success of Minecraft, going to $1 billion. And it's starting with the cultural element of it, and then expanding from there.
Yeah. Now, this is, for anyone who's not into gaming, this is wild, right? Because you actually have big stadiums where people are going live to watch people play.
Correct.
Not actually play. I mean, that is incredible as a live experience. It's taking it really from offline world the online world completely into offline world, isn't it? So how much of the business is now like the live version of it?
Well, esports is really big. I mean, I think you have to go back to, I think about my days working at Reebok and, with athletes. And so if you think about Nike or Adidas, like the athlete is the kind of the center of the bullseye, right? They are, the apex of their sport, and, they are kind of the ambassador for the sport. But then when you kind of go out from there, there's people that run 3 to 5 times a week. There's people that run 2 times a week. But then 80% of people buy sneakers and don't actually do anything in them, right? And just, wear them to have comfort and stuff. And so you got to think about that same thing from a gaming standpoint. There are these elite players that are really good at their sport, right? And so, and they are, the catalyst for competition and being able to kind of evangelize for the sport. And then you expand from there, where you look at, okay, building on the fandom of people that, want to be like them and admire and want to play competitively. And then you have, ranked modes in some of these games where you as a fan can even be in your own competition and make it into some of these tournaments. And then you have everybody else that is just kind of casual and doesn't want to be as sweaty and wants to play. So I think it plays a really important part of that ecosystem from a gaming standpoint. And it's something that we continue to invest in and be excited about.
And are these players, are they kind of earning a living doing this? Is this like their full-time job?
Or 100%. Yeah. I mean, whether it's playing in the competitions or streaming live, there's the audience for streaming is huge, even bigger probably than the esports audience, where you can just set up at home and be able to play the game for the first time, and you can be a streamer and an influencer, right? And I think that potential, to kind of hustle and grow an audience is really powerful, and just connect with your audience.
It's kind of wild, isn't it? Like that, going back to where we started, follow your passion, that you can actually grow up, be really obsessed about gaming, and then turn that into a career. It's something that just didn't exist 10 years ago, is it?
No, I mean, technology has, made it so much more accessible, right? And I think you just need, a YouTube or a Twitch account, or even on TikTok now, we're seeing a lot of live streams. And I think obviously it's competitive, and you have to have something that differentiates you and makes you unique, and if you want to build a really big audience. But, it's a big part of our marketing funnel, and, we're looking at who the latest streamers are. We're actually investing in a lot of streamers. So we just did something called Level Up Labs, and we brought 10 female streamers in, and, on the come up, right? Like just getting started, and, introduce them to the marketing team, and then we show them how we make content, how we capture content. We brought them to the studios. We show how we make the games and how we do motion capture. And then we put them in a room where they got to play a new mode and create content and have exclusive access for that content in advance. And so, it's an opportunity for us to kind of invest in the next wave of streamers. And over time, we think that's going to pay off dividends by having those relationships. Yeah.
What's the ratio out of interest between male and female players?
Yeah, I think in with our competitive set, I think it's something like 75-25, so 75% male and 25% female, and it's something that like we've been investing a lot in. So we did a big push around International Women's Month, and just highlighting all the the iconic characters, female characters that have been in the games over the last 23 years in Call of Duty. And then we did this Level Up Labs initiative. We just announced that we have Kiernan Shipka, an actress who's going to star in our next game. And so it's an area that I think was underserved, and I think something that we want to invest in more. If you think about, there's 100 million Warzone players. That's our free-to-play game that anybody can jump in to. That's 25 million women that are out there playing the game. Now, I realize most people don't believe that stat, but definitely look at some of the third-party research and look at some of our competitors, and it's all in that kind of similar space. Now, they might not be the most vocal, or they might, you might not know, but they're playing the game, right? And I think it really speaks to, I think people have a perception of what Call of Duty is, and I think in reality, there's so many different ways to play the game, right? So you obviously have the mainline game, which is like the big blockbuster that we release every year, the free-to-play game in Warzone, and then you have our mobile game, COD Mobile, which has over 1 billion downloads, right? And so anybody can jump in and start to play. And then I think in addition to that, there's so many different ways to play. So like in the free-to-play game, I play this game called Plunder. And it's like you run around and collect cash, and you can, engage and, have combat. But at the same time, it's really just about who collects the most money. So you can be really covert, not see anybody, and still win the match. And then we have other modes, like prop hunt, which is you can be a refrigerator, or you can be a tire or a sofa, and you hide in the map. And it's hide and seek. It's adult hide and seek, right? In a lot of ways, and you have to go find that individual hiding in the map and hunt them down and stuff. And then you have zombies mode, which I think is really accessible. Anybody can have fun shooting some zombies and stuff, right? And so I think that makes it much more approachable. But I think when you look on the outside, you kind of have one perception of what the game is. And I think when you start playing it, you realize that there's actually so many different ways to play.
Yeah, there must be some psychology into how kind of games work and what makes games so kind of entertaining to do. So how much of the success of a franchise is down to kind of the product experience versus the kind of marketing you put behind it?
Yeah, when we look at all the research and we stack rank what players value inside of the game, it really comes down to one thing, and it's having fun with your friends. And I know that sounds so cliche for a CMO and a marketer to come in here and to say that, but definitely look into it, because I think it's all about this social connection, right? Like it's about playing with my buddies, on a Friday. And so I think in a lot of ways, I think we could change the game dramatically, and still people would come on and play the game, because it's that, those bonds that they've made over many, many, many years, right, of playing the game together. And I think, that hasn't changed since I've joined the company about 4.5 years ago. It's always the number one reason why they come, and it's always the number one reason why they leave, is because their friends are there or they're not there and stuff, right? And so for us, it's really about fostering those social connections and really tapping into culture in a big way. I think when you think about the game itself, we have all these amazing studios, and they're the storytellers. They're creating amazing experiences every single year, and that's the heart of what makes a game successful. But what they're looking for, and I think what we're looking for in the crossover, is the same thing. Is like, okay, how do we encourage people to have fun and embrace the fun in the game?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You've been doing Call of Duty for quite a long time now as well. It must be one of the longest running franchises of anything, I'd have thought, compared to even kind of Hollywood movie franchises. Been going for quite a long time. And am I right in saying 23 editions now?
Yes, there's been 23 Call of Duty games, and we're on our way to the 24th. And I think in a lot of ways, it's a brand over time that is, stayed consistent. It's obviously a military simulator in a lot of ways, but it goes back to, it's always been part of culture, right? And so on the marketing side, we like to think, it's culture first, combat second. I think in a lot of ways, it's, okay, how do we foster that connection? How do we make sure that we're the center of sports and entertainment and music? And that's always been part of the DNA, even going back to the old days and stuff of some of the creative that we've put out into market. And now there's even more opportunity to bring that into the game, right? Where you see all these IP collaborations, bringing Squid Game into Call of Duty for the first time, and some of the artist collaborations that we've done over the years. So, or even we were talking about the music, in some of our trailers and how iconic it is. And so that's part of the DNA and what's really made it successful.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the kind of, I guess, how do you launch a new edition? So 23 to almost 24 times in, how do you keep the energy and build on what you've done before and launch it? Because I know you did a really kind of cool campaign last year called The Replacer, which I thought was a very clever way, very good insight into kind of gaming culture.
Yeah.
How did that all work?
Staying number one is really hard, but we have some principles, right? So from a marketing standpoint, we like to think about stature, swagger, and scale, right? So stature is doing things that only Call of Duty can do, right? And we think about swagger, it's like, how do we infiltrate culture in innovative ways? And then we think about scale, like how do we reach as many people as possible? And so, with some of the campaigns that we developed last year, I mean, the first one was called Truth Lies, and that was really introducing the game of Black Ops 6. And it was all about government conspiracy and, not trusting what was happening in the world. And it was election year. I think about half the world, the earth was, voting and stuff at that time. And so we went up to Mount Rushmore and we blindfolded it. And so I think in some ways we wanted to be very provocative, and we wrote the truth lies across the president's faces and, really kind of land this idea of, is this something only Call of Duty can do? And I think blindfolding Mount Rushmore is both big, culturally relevant, and very unique and stuff. With the Replacer campaign, the Replacer was actually an old concept. It was from Black Ops 2 from about 10 years ago, but it was from the live season. So like when we, not the main launch, but throughout the seasonal launches, and he was a character. It was played by Peter Stormare from Prison Break. We wanted to bring him back in a big way, and I think one of the things that we observed was, one, all this media fragmentation of like, okay, how do you show up in a lot of different places? Two, I think with a video game, it's really hard because it's gameplay. It's, capturing content from the game. How do I get that on a talk show, right? How do I get that on a podcast if there's all these new mediums? So by bringing Peter in as our replacer, it enabled us to put him in a lot of places that we weren't able to kind of tap into before. So the replacer replaces you in your day job. So he'd replace you on the podcast so that you can go play Call of Duty. And, normally we'd shoot a big spot, 60 or 90, and we'd cut it into shorter formats and maybe do some social content on the side. And that would be the campaign. Here, we had 40 different assets, right, that we created, each one bespoke, custom to the audience. And it enabled us to do so many more things. So we had the replacer on Jeopardy. We had the replacer on Wheel of Fortune. We had the replacer on the cover of People magazine as the sexiest man alive. We took the replacer and worked with, all kinds with DAZN in Europe, Sky Sports. And so all of these different talent, and some of them he worked with directly, some of them he replaced, like Anthony Edwards and the NBA. And so it really kind of allowed us to kind of put this character in so many different places that Call of Duty normally doesn't show up.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very clever idea. And how did that impact on the launch? Can you trace the results back from that campaign to the amount of people that downloaded the game?
Yeah, I mean, we look at awareness and we look at social conversation. I'm big on KPIs, and our insights team, we worked on what actually moves the needle and looked at 2,000 different KPIs. And really, the more people talking about Call of Duty, the better, more success that we'll have, right? And so in generating not only awareness, but also, purchases. And so, this campaign was one of our most engaged campaigns, and it was also the game, Black Ops 6 ended up being one of our most engaged games right out off the bat and stuff. I think we sold some of the most units on PlayStation and Steam. And then obviously with Xbox and Game Pass, it's kind of offered a new dynamic for us from a business standpoint that allowed us to tap into even a wider audience of all these subscribers who could play Call of Duty for the first time if they haven't before. And so, yeah, it was one of our more successful game launches, and, it was number one once again in the US.
Now, going back to our earlier conversation about partnerships, like what kind of partnerships will you typically do in a game launch? A bit like I was doing on Mountain Dew. Do you partner with other kind of properties to get word out there? And
yeah, I mean, we think about them the same way with those 3 S's, right? So we're thinking about, okay, what partners are going to bring some stature and allow us to do something that, we haven't been able to do before. So, we did a collaboration with Liquid Death, thinking about our zombies experience, and we did a PSA for eating brain and zombies, and Liquid Death would kind of protect you from that by keeping your brain hydrated. We have Monster from an energy drink standpoint, which is really great because you get double XP when you buy a Monster pack and stuff. And so, our audience just loves that. So they're able to rank up faster inside of the game. And then we have, partnerships with like Little Caesars, which just allows you to kind of have, you buy a pizza and you get an operator, kind of a pizza operator in the game. And so I think those partnerships really kind of unlock, new audiences for us, but also double down on that lifestyle component of our current audience. And I think for a brand like Polaris, they were introducing the Razor, and we actually put it in game. Players could drive it in game, but we also created an experience in the real world where they could drive it in real life. And we brought 250 creators to DC during our next event, and they got to drive the razors and kind of experience them. So we're helping our partners create a lot of new content, allowing them to tap into new audiences, and they're doing the same for us in return.
It takes me back to my time at Mountain Dew, actually, because I was thinking, why are energy drinks kind of associated with gaming? And then what I discovered once I kind of looked into it is that gamers were playing for hours and didn't want to give up. And literally the energy drink was the thing that got them through, to the next levels. And I thought, wow, that's energy drinks can be mental stimulation as well as physical. Not just about kind of, going more physically, but also going more mentally as well.
Well, when you have those intense sessions, right, where you want to be focused, and I think in a lot of ways people tap into to Monster to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, talking about kind of sport and let's go on to kind of talk about Tony Hawk. So how are you kind of taking the world of sport and turning it into a game like skating? Like how does that work?
Well, you see in a lot of the research that like people play video games in order to get better at that sport. And you wouldn't think that, but I think, the amount of focus when you play a game like Tony and you're looking at knowing all the tricks, seeing how they're performed, right? And, unlike maybe 20 or 30 years ago, and like they're actually modeled off of these tricks, right? When they do the motion capture, they're doing those tricks in the room. And so you're able to kind of learn, some new skills. And I think, it also builds that camaraderie, I think, with other, players and stuff. So, if you look at from a Call of Duty perspective, the Kansas City Chiefs, won the Super Bowl a couple years ago, and they all credited playing Call of Duty together as, their keys to success because they were collaborating, communicating, off the field, and that was enabling them to communicate better on the field. So I think in a lot of ways, there's this huge crossover between what happens in the game and then also what's happening in real life, whether you're learning about new tricks in Tony Hawk or whether you're communicating with your friends better so that you can play on team sports better, I think is kind of interesting and exciting.
Yeah, I saw that clip actually. That was wild, wasn't it? Because they were playing the game just before doing the Super Bowl, and they were literally going, we were all on there together, collaborating, trying to win, trying to get through this level together, and the camaraderie that it built between them. And I remember them saying, literally, we took that onto the pitch.
Yeah, and we see it in so many different sports, right? It's not just in the NFL, but whether it's in basketball, we had the USA team playing in Paris last year and stuff. And so I think a lot of ways, I think there's this connection that people have and being able to kind of level up and communicate and just, by the way, spend more time with each other, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really what it comes down to when you think about team sports.
Yeah. And which sports are you going to be kind of gamifying, as it were? Have you got any plans to kind of take it into any other sports?
I think on the Call of Duty side, we always kind of look at the crossover between, sport and the game and stuff. So we did a big World Cup kind of push a few years ago. And so we're always kind of looking at new ways to kind of, leverage the current game, right, and new ways to kind of facilitate that. But yeah, nothing to announce today, but we're always on looking at things in the horizon.
Yeah, it does feel like a good crossover, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we brought Messi into the game. It was really exciting. And I think, we bring a lot of the athletes over from an IP perspective because I think, that they're avid players. They come to us and they're like, hey, how do I get an operator in the game? And so we look at it and we say, okay, is there enough of an audience and is this the right opportunity? But I think their fans love it. And we also see like LeBron James' son, he was actually playing in one of our Call of Duty tournaments. He ended up winning. And so we love that collaboration that happens between, the sport and the game itself.
I mean, it might be anecdotal, but the amount of like athletes that I follow where you'll have some kind of, photo of them kind of playing a game before they go into the match, or they're on the kind of tour bus and you see them kind of competing. There must be a big overlap between kind of like elite sports people and gaming. It just feels like that competitive spirit probably exists in both kind of worlds, doesn't it?
Yeah, we see people with these trunks and they have the PlayStation and a screen, and these athletes actually carry them, as they're traveling. And so being able to play, together at the hotels, and so we get those videos, and we've facilitated it too. We've created some of these trunks and we've handed them out to athletes. And I think also thinking about, okay, what are some other ways that we can get them into the competition? So we've brought them we have an annual event called Next. And so we bring 250 of the biggest creators to the event, and they get to play the new game before anybody else. And we try to bring in some of those athletes that are fans and giving them the opportunity to play for the first time too. And that's always exciting.
Yeah. I should probably ask you about AI, because I'm sure everyone asks you about AI and the impact. What impact is AI having on gaming, and how will it change how you market?
Yeah, I mean, it always starts with the people and the creativity of the people developing the game and, our marketing team. But it's a tool, right? Like, I don't see it as much more than that right now. In a lot of ways, the team is looking for ways to leverage it, but I don't see it as anything more than any other tool that we've used in the past, right? And I think, obviously we're part of Microsoft now, and so there's a lot of, opportunity to leverage AI in unique ways. But it really starts down with, even in AI, when you have to put up a prompt, right? And it comes down to the idea that you put into the system and stuff, and being able to, complement what we do. I think on the marketing side, it allows me to move a lot faster, right? So I was going to go to art school. I had a portfolio. I applied to all these art schools. And I give it up for business, and I went down the marketing track. But now, like, someone will send me over an idea and a piece of creative. We were actually working on a pair of shoes for a tennis player that was a collaboration for Call of Duty Mobile, Jessica Pegula. And they sent me over the shoes, and I was like, hey, I think we could do better. I think we could make something a little bit more like this. We could add a little gold to it, maybe some wings. And I could generate it and send it back and go, don't do this, but give them more of a direction. Before, it would be rounds and rounds of notes, right? And it would be like, okay, add some gold and some wings and things, and you'd write it back, and maybe they would interpret that the right way, or you might get something totally different, and that would lead to another round. And so being able to kind of visualize it a little bit more, or being able to send to a director, hey, the lighting should be a little bit more red like this, enables that director then go, okay, this is what I need to do. And it lets me speak a different language, which I think is empowering.
Now, I should finish up by saying we've got Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 and 4 coming out quite soon. Did you get to work with him on the launch?
Yeah, I mean, he's actively involved. We threw a giant, kind of launch party, and people got to play, and we brought all the skaters out, so he was there. We just had the Xbox Showcase where they announced all the new games, and we had a new trailer there, and he introduced it. And he'll be, out doing a press tour, around the game closer to launch. So we're really excited. He's been an amazing partner, always has been, and we're glad to have him kind of back in the mix.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's become a bit of a social media sensation, hasn't he? The whole kind of I'm Tony Hawk, wherever he turns up, people kind of go, you look a bit like Tony Hawk.
Yeah. And he's all over TV right now, I think, doing a number of other commercials and partnerships and stuff. And I think us dads, right, relate a lot to him in a lot of way, in the way that he's kind of a father figure to a lot of us. So I think, excited to work with him.
Yeah, well, absolutely, legend. Well, look, good luck with the launch. I'll be watching very closely because big fan here. All right, one final question. So you've had this wild journey of kind of like big startup, multi-billion investment that then kind of fails. And now you're working for a huge organization in Activision, obviously owned by Microsoft, and with some of the biggest brand properties in the world. As you look back on your career, what would you say are the kind of really big key learnings that have been critical to your journey and your success?
Some of the advice I give to up-and-coming marketers is it's a really simple concept. It's follow the manager and follow the money. And I'm not talking about how much money you make. I'm talking about the investment within the organization and stuff. And so, I've really found success when I got under an amazing manager, right, to the moon, right? They were investing in me. They were looking after me. They were giving me advice, giving me that crucial feedback, that radical candor that I was, always looking for. And then on the money side, it's like, okay, what's hot right now? Where are things, where is the company investing? Where are the resources? Where do you have money to actually do fun things, right? And to be able to build campaigns. And, I think I saw that over and over again. And when you have both of those things, I think you can be really, really successful. I think if you have one of those things, it's okay and pretty good. And when you don't have either of those things, I usually tell people maybe it's time to look around. And so, I think that's kind of the advice that I've learned over time, because I've had such amazing mentors and managers, whether, my first manager at Kara, this woman named Erin Wilkinson, I'm the godfather to her daughter and stuff, right? And she, she invested in me, and she gave me different opportunities and taught me how to be a comm strategist and really understand strategy. And then, thinking at Google, I got under, the vice president of marketing there, Marvin Chow, and, he invested in me, told me all kinds of different things about, how to operate in a big company like Google. And then I think even going to a startup, under, Jeffrey and Meg and, Jeffrey, this legend in the industry and this amazing creative mind, right? And being able to, this is someone that created The Lion King and Little Mermaid and Shrek and all these, and really understanding film and the TV industry, and which was definitely new to me. And so I think all of those opportunities, have led to my growth. And then I think on the money side, I was like always looking out where at Google, were we investing, right? What were the opportunities? What were the new apps that were coming out that were going to have big pushes behind them? Thinking about Reebok back in the day and like what are the right sneakers that, we were investing in, and what were people getting excited about? What new sports, after the Adidas acquisition? So I think, if I had one lesson that I could leave people with, that's probably it.
That's an amazing lesson, actually. I in fact, the older I get, the more I'm obsessed about just working with people that I want to work with, that give me energy, that, excite me. Because, in fact, I'll probably say, don't join a company, join a boss. It's far, because if you think the boss you have is far more critical to your success than the name above the door often. And then actually, I love your second point as well, because there's a book I read a few years ago called, I think it's called The Second Bounce of the Ball, which is all about, don't think about where the ball's bouncing now, think about where the ball will bounce to next, and then align yourself to that in terms of direction. So that's great advice.
I think you have to look around the company and go, okay, where are they hiring right now, right? Like what is the area of the company that is getting the most focus and attention? And then I think having some dollars in investment, especially as a marketer, right? Like if you're really limited there, yes, it forces you to be more creative, but obviously there's a lot more potential if you can go and do some bigger kind of activations and whatnot. And so you want to see where those opportunities are, and that'll kind of enable you to do better work.
I did this really simple exercise a few years ago in my career where I just wrote down in one bubble all the things the company struggles with or can't do well, right? And then in another bubble, things that I'm personally really passionate about, and I just looked for the overlap. And in this case, I was working, this is actually when I worked at Mountain Dew, actually, because I was going, I love innovation and creativity and coming up with new things. And the business was failing at that because we had launched too many things in a row. And what's happening is we'd gone from being really successful to starting to fail because we literally launch and leave. We just do a big noisy launch and then we'd go on to the next thing. And of course, they just kept on dying off. So you just kept on, seeing them all fall away. And so I just pitched the company and said, well, I love innovation and the company needs to fix it. I'm going to go and create a new job and it's going to be leading innovation. Yeah. And it got signed off because the board recognised what I was talking about in terms of the need. They saw my passion for it, and then I created my own job.
Well, I mean, building on that, I think it's a lot of people I talk to, especially junior people, are focused on their title, focused on how much money they're going to make. And I think a lot of ways, I found success around putting the company first, putting the team second, putting myself third, right? And when I did that, the money and the title and everything else came, right? And so, in that example you just gave, right, it's like, you had an idea about where the company could go and what the opportunity was. And I think in a lot of ways that shows, right? Like I think that shows to, a manager or an executive that you have this passion for the company. You have this, you care for the team and the culture. And then you're putting yourself in the backseat. And a lot of times, now I know there's a lot of things about leaning in and advocating for yourself. And I believe in a lot of that. If it's not happening, you don't get the manager or the money, like I said before, it's time to leave and stuff. But I think starting with the company team and yourself, I think is probably, good advice, because I think that will show from your execution.
There's another funny lesson actually in that, because if your dream job doesn't exist, go and create it. Because it was, I just applied for that. Had this sort of management development program at the company I was working for, where you could apply, and if you got through the assessment centre, you'd be on this fast track to kind of senior management. And I'd gone on it and I'd failed. I hadn't got through, and I was absolutely gutted. And I was like, I'm going to leave the company. I'm really fed up. And then I'd gone away on a kind of training course where you get a bit of time to reflect on what you want to do. And that's where I came up with this thing of like, well, let's really think about if I've missed the chance to do this development thing, but maybe I could go and kind of pitch my own role. And the irony of it is that I ended up getting promoted higher than where I would have done had I been on this course. And I was just like, what a learning, like take flipping control of where you want to go. And there was loads of complaints actually, because I remember the moment I basically pitched the board for this role. And I got told about this conversation they had after the meeting that I wasn't part of. But the HR director had said to the CMO, who was basically backing what I was doing, shouldn't we get one of the senior managers on the development program to run the department that John's just suggested, because they're in line ahead of him? And the CMO said, you can send any of the senior managers on the development program to an interview, and I'll give them an interview from hell. You can't tell the architect he's not going to build his own building. And therefore, I end up getting the promotion. The people that had done this management course didn't. So anyway, there you go. Yeah. So sometimes, rejection can force you to, to do
innovate and push yourself, right?
Push yourself
and be creative of
yourself.
How to get there, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I think people think it's a straight line, and it's not, right? Like, I think it's this zigzag on a map that, gets you to where you go. I wanted to work in sneakers. I applied to every sneaker company. I was a big sneakerhead, and I got rejected by all of them, including Reebok. And so I just went and said, okay, who's their agency, right? And I went and worked for their media agency. And 3 years later, they poached me and asked me to come down to, work for them directly. So I think you have to think outside of the box. And, I like we started this conversation, it's about your passions, but it's not going to be the first step, right? You might not be able to just go right into gaming or go right into sneakers or go into something else, but there is a path to get there. And maybe it's just building yourself up as a marketer, working on, I worked on Philips Advent baby care products, and it wasn't my dream. It wasn't, something I knew when I was 23 years old, but, I showed that I can learn something that I knew nothing about, and that I could be a good marketer there. And that allowed me to jump onto the Reebok account.
That's so true. I think people forget that actually, if you don't get your dream job, find the adjacent job to it and prove yourself, like basically, like you say, in the media, the creative, then. Because I did this, the similar thing happened back at Britvic, where the dream job came up, right? Pepsi Max, which is it basically is a bit similar to Mountain Dew in the UK, right? In terms of brand, it was a very, very cool brand, and it was doing some awesome stuff. And I applied and didn't get the job, and I was really, really pissed off. So I ended up leaving the company and going to another company, and it was much smaller. But I got promoted far more quickly in the smaller company because I basically took more responsibility, managed more brands, and then I got poached back by my previous company into like 2 levels above where I'd applied originally, because I'd got the experience and I'd proven myself.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's about being curious and diversifying, right? Like I started in affiliate marketing, right? It was, that's where it was the very beginning, and then kind of going into comm strategy, and then building media, and then building into social media. And then you add all these notches to your belt where you can go, I can go do anything, and I can go after any job that I feel, that I'm passionate about and excited about, and really kind of get it, because I have all of these different experiences, and I'm more well-rounded marketer overall.
Back to our Scott Galloway point then, what you could do then is find the less sexy role that people don't want to do in the brand, and then learn your trade there, and then eventually you end up getting to work on the sexy bit. So don't give up.
So follow your passions, just you might have a roundabout way of getting there. So
exactly.
That's what's exciting.
Tyler, amazing advice, mate. Thank you so much, and pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for listening or watching Uncensored CMO. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please do hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching, hit subscribe there as well. I'd also love to get a review. Reviews make a big difference on other people discovering the show, so please do leave a review wherever you get your podcast. If you want to contact me, you can do. I'm over on X at UncensoredCMO, or on LinkedIn, where I'm under my own name, John Evans. Thanks for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.